the power of the king of Israel and the power to declare war. And it's kind of interesting watching what's going on right now, where Israel operates not as a monarchy, but a democracy, a very robust and sometimes even crazy democracy. And it's kind of interesting watching how a war is conducted when you're running a democracy. And we take it for granted because, well, let's look at the dictatorships. On one level, those are far more efficient. You got to say they're more efficient. But I mean, in the last 50 or 100 years, if you look at how things worked out, every time something in me says this democracy stuff doesn't really work very well at wartime, you see what happens when there's not a democracy. So forget about the Jewish relationship with Hitler. Just practically speaking, the Germans paid a very big price in the end by not having more of a democracy. So no one really could talk to Hitler. Forget about the Jewish issue for now. Nobody could talk to him. He couldn't be stopped. So when his highest ranking generals wanted to tell him it's not working and we're losing the war and it's all going under, and you're sending more and more people to the front door, again, forget about the Jewish factor for a moment. People might have said to him, we could kill the Jews later. Right now, we could use them during the war. We're spending all this energy killing Jews. I mean, we lost an Einstein. He could have blown up the Americans, And you see what happened to Germany and Imperial Japan. Like maybe somebody could have said to them, maybe it's not such a good idea to bomb Pearl Harbor. We really don't need America to get involved in the war yet. You can't talk to the emperor. And once the war started, it's sort of after the first bomb was dropped. And it was already clear it's over. But you couldn't talk to the emperor. So he had to get another bomb. And you just look around the Soviet Union. So they had Stalin, very effective, very efficient. And he caused a lot of grief for their own long-term. In the end, the Soviet Union fell. So as you look around and you look at the dictatorships and all the different Arab dictatorships, none of them really has very much to show for themselves after the last 2,000 years. What new invention have they given the world besides suicide belts? I mean, really, what do they have? The only thing they've been able to pull off at all is oil, because they just happen to be sitting on it. And even then, they needed the British and the Americans to grab it out. And so that's the side of the coin for democracy. In the end of the day, the Americans, the British, the Israelis, in the end, the democracies have worked. But there's a lot in the democratic process that also is a mess. And we live in a democracy, whether you're talking about those of us in Israel, those of us in America, and you see how inefficient it can be because of the nature of democracy, where everyone plays gotcha, because everyone is balancing patriotism and a devotion to their country with their self-interest in getting elected and continuing to get elected. So they will sell out their own country if they feel it could help them in elections. And we see it all the time. And let's say there's something Obama did right, or something Biden did right, or something Trump did right. You're really not going to get Democrats admit that Trump did anything right. And it's going to be pretty hard to find Republicans willing to say Obama did anything right, because there's too much else at stake. And so what happens is everybody's pulling against instead of pulling together. And you see it now in the war in Israel and Hamas. And I give Benny Gantz a lot of credit. He's the main opposition guy. He would be a terrible prime minister. And right now, he's the leading guy to be prime minister if they have new elections. Israel's generals they're the worst prime ministers. And Israel has a love for generals as prime ministers. Normally, every general with a reputation of being great, Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, all of these guys, they all got to be, in many cases, prime ministers. And they really were very, very poor prime ministers. And they left behind a very big mess more often than not. Even on the right-wing side, Menachem Begin wasn't a general. They would not allow him to rise up because of politics, because that's what that was about. But he was the commander of the Irgun. Yitzhak Shamir was the commander of the Lehi. And in both their cases, they never got to be a general because they never got a chance. Okay. So what you end up with is a situation. I'm watching, as we all are, what's going on in Israel. And Israel just did something amazing the other day. You know, they freed those 2 hostages deep in the south of Gaza. We have some really wonderful footage for Sunday's class. And you could really tell there are people in Israel that were rooting against it. And they were really hoping that the soldiers would have gotten killed and not succeeded, because it was going to make Netanyahu look better. I give Gantz credit. He's a good guy. He's pulling for the same side. But then you have people, they're already holding demonstrations in Tel Aviv, calling for the government to resign. They had a big demonstration calling for Netanyahu to resign. In America, you get elected for 4 years. And even if people made a big mistake, that's what you got for the next 4 years until the next mistake. And so in Israel, like in Britain, it's a weird thing. They have an election and there's like a 4-year term. Guy's been elected. And then what you do is you try to tear down the government anyway. It never ends. You just demand that the government resign and you demand new elections. That far we haven't reached yet in the United States. If we did, it certainly would be going on now. In America, so instead, Pelosi would try to impeach Trump every year. And with Biden and Kamala, so they'll have elections in a few months anyway. We'll see what ends up happening. My prediction is that whoever wins the election in November, there's almost a guarantee that the guy who loses the election in November will end up in jail 3 months later or a year later. You're almost first time ever that you have a guarantee that the guy who loses the presidential election is going to end up in jail in a year. It was different in Torah times, because Torah times was a monarchy, and that's what we've been learning in Rambam and in the Gemara. We're going to see something as we start now. And the power of the monarch to declare war, we've been learning Tuesday night class. If King Saul declared war, and on the other hand, if King Saul thought he was going to lose, that was going to redound to everyone's defeat. And now King David will be making decisions. And it's interesting watching how it plays out now. You have the American president saying, I don't want Israel going into the south and attacking in Rafah. And the Israelis believe they have to attack in Rafah. Not just Netanyahu. Gantz knows it also. And he has said it. Otherwise, the whole point of the war doesn't make any sense, because everybody knew you're going to go attacking from northern Gaza, and you're going to keep pushing them back and back and back till their back is up against the wall. Something called the Philadelphia Corridor. And the Philadelphia Corridor is a strip of land right before Egypt. And everybody knew that all the leaders of Hamas are going to retreat to there, and they're going to bring all the hostages with them there. And they've got all the tunnels there. And everybody knew they're going to have to, if they don't go ultimately and do in the south what they've done everywhere else, what's the point? It's like, I mean, it may not be nice to say, but it's like getting an exterminator for the ants. So you tell the guy comes in and he says, I'm going to have to exterminate all your you have, let's say, 3 bathrooms. So I got to spray in the 3 rooms with this water. And you tell the guy, I'm only going to let you spray in 1 bathroom. He's going to tell you that I'm not going to be able to get rid of the ants. They're going to go to the other bathroom. The only way to get rid of the ants is you got to spray in all the bathrooms. So you got to spray all the bathrooms. So Netanyahu's in a very interesting position right now. He's had 6 wars in the last 18 or so years. Yeah, 18 years since 2006. 6 wars. Every single war, Israel successfully pounds Hamas. They retreat to the south. America then gets involved, whether it's a George Bush, or whether it's an Obama, or whether it's a Biden. And then they start pressing Israel, you have to stop. So Israel stops. And then the ants come back. And it's all over again. So what's different this time, really? The main difference this time is that the political polling, they're doing polling just like they ask in America, who are you going to vote for? Netanyahu is just toast. After like 15 years of always being the preferred candidate, he has been toast in the polls ever since October 7th. And then suddenly now he knows if he stops the war now, everyone's going to look and say, so you did it a 7th time. Same as last, we're going to end up getting attacked again, and we want to change. He's finished. So the difference this time is for his own political survival, not only that he's a patriot and he wants to protect Israel. He always wanted to protect Israel, but he never really has had the guts or the stomach, as he seems strong, but there's talking the talk and walking the walk. And he always backs down in the end. But this time, he's not only a great patriot who wants to do the right thing, but this time he knows he has no choice. If he doesn't do the right thing, which he knows is the right thing, he knows his political career is over anyway. Whereas if he does the right thing, people may actually come away and say, that's the BB we've been voting for the last 18 years. We've been waiting for this. Good for you. We didn't think you had it in you. And he may actually turn it around. Now, only once before has an Israeli political leader been in this kind of situation with a wonderful, wonderful legacy that all went down the drain overnight. And that was Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan. One can discuss whether they even deserved those legacies, but they had big legacies, and then came the Yom Kippur War. And what happened is they never recovered from the nation blaming them for the Yom Kippur War and being caught flat-footed, and they never did anything to show that they learned from it. So it was only a matter of time till the country moved over to elect Begin. Netanyahu has a chance to show. Now, it's going to be a challenging period. It's really so challenging for us as Jews to be on the wrong side of the public debate. We're on the right side of the truth, but that doesn't count. That doesn't matter. When you look at how many likes or followers, I don't know, Netanyahu has, and how many followers Taylor Swift has, I mean, that's what you're dealing with. And so what does this have to do with the king? The king was a person you didn't mess with. You did not go and hold a demonstration in Tel Aviv saying, we're demanding the king step down in new elections. King would have you executed. So the king decided what he's going to do, who's going to war. And you'll notice from our Tuesday night Bible class, Tanakh, there is never a consideration when you're dealing with Saul or David, there's never a consideration about what other countries are thinking about it. They do what they have to do. And they understand if you're going to have a Jewish country in Israel, you have no choice. You have to do what's best for Israel, and you have to not rely on other countries. And that's very easy to say when you're sitting in front of a computer in America. But that's how Israel came into being. Because if it were up to the other countries, there would have been no Israel. And instead, they did what they had to do. And then people said, Harry Truman is not going to give you weapons. Yes, he voted for you in the UN, but he's now refusing to send weapons to Israel. How can you stand up? And so they made their own weapons. We learned that on our Sunday class a year ago. They created their own weapons factories. and they started getting weapons illegally. They found, what did God do? He convinced the communists in Czechoslovakia. Miracle. Communists in Czechoslovakia sold them weapons. The anti-Semites in Poland. Are there bigger anti-Semites than Poland in the 1940s? The Polish were such anti-Semites that they supported the Irgun and the Lehi. They were the biggest supporters of an independent Jewish state. Why would the biggest anti-Semites support it? That's your answer. And the question is the answer. They wanted to get rid of all the Jews. And they never thought of the idea of killing all the Jews. They thought it would be much easier just get them a country and then throw them all out. And so they support, and Stern of the Lehi and Begin, they knew what the motivation was. They didn't care. We don't care what your motivation is. Just give us the weapons, train our fighters, and we'll fight. So we come to the king of Israel, because in the time of the Rambam, the king made war, and the king decided everything. And no one stood up to the king and dared go against the king's will. And we're going to learn this Gemara. It's a very, very telling Gemara that explains a great deal about it. The Gemara in Sanhedrin. Here we go. Let's just take this off the screen. Okay. The Gemara in Sanhedrin. Hamavat, on the one hand, God is the only one who outranks the king. We learned already, so I won't reread it. You could not mock the king. You could not make drawings or cartoons or hand drawings or make jokes about the king. He could have you executed and would. So you didn't mess with the king. You didn't mess with the king. Okay. So here's a very interesting halacha. Kevar be'arnu, shemached beit David danin otanu me'idin alein. A king of Israel, as powerful as he was, and he could have anyone executed if he felt that person was being critical of him, if he just took things the wrong way and was wrong about it. Nevertheless, you could put the king on trial, and the king could be called to testify. The Malchei Beit David, the kings of the house of David. So let's refresh our memory in a moment what it looked like. Here's another map of the 12 tribes. And you had the yellow stuff is Israel. And green is the Gaza Strip is the Philistines. And green here is Moab. And pink red is Ammon. Ammon today is Jordan. You notice they have a capital, Amman. And Ammon goes right up to where, here's the Jordan River. And remember, the land of Israel included the west bank of the Jordan, Judea and Samaria. Here's Yehuda. Here's Shomron. And the east bank of the Jordan River. There's the Sea of Galilee, or the Yam Kinneret. And there's the Yam HaMelach, the Dead Sea, and there's the Jordan River. And east of the Jordan also was Israel. And so the king was quite powerful. And the surrounding countries were Ammon and Moab, today that's Jordan. Philistia we've talked about. Phoenicia, then today is Lebanon, with cities like Sidon and Tyre, Tyre. Also northern contemporary Israel, Akkra, the Galilee area, that's included in what was then Lebanon. And then you have Aram. In biblical times, today it's Syria. There's Damascus. So you had kings of the north, the northern kingdom, and kings of the south, the southern kingdom. The Malchei Beis Yehuda, the kings from the house of Judea, Yehuda, that's King David, that's the descendants of David, Solomon, Shlomo, Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, up to Mashiach. That's the southern kingdom. Most famous was David. Chizkiyahu was also greatly righteous. And these were righteous kings by and large, with some exceptions. And that's the downside of having a king. When a king dies, if his son who succeeds him is evil, like King Menashe, who succeeded King Chizkiah, he ruled for 55 years of evil, and he brought down the Jewish people. And it was his sins and what he did to the Jewish people that led God to punish the Jews and bring in the invader from Babylonia. Took down the Beit HaMikdash. And then you had the northern kingdom. Again, it's in the yellow. It's those 10 tribes. They became the 10 lost tribes when they were driven out by the Ashur, the Assyrians, not to be confused with Syria, Assyria. So they drove out the 10 tribes, leaving behind only Yehuda, Binyamin, and Levi. The 13 altogether, since Joseph splits in half Menashe and Ephraim. Okay, back to the Gemara and back to the Rambam. So Rambam is saying that we've already learned that Malchei Beit David, the kings from the word Melech, king, David, the kings of the house of David, the kings of Judea in the south, we learned, Dani Notan, you can put them on trial. Umeid Naleim, you can testify against them. And this, of course, is incredibly pertinent nowadays. You've got all these different lawfare cases against Trump, and they're busy holding committee hearings on whether Biden was involved in all sides of graft and everything. So it's very pertinent. We put our presidents theoretically, though we never really do, until Trump. But now we see that it was a thing that could be done in ancient Israel. And Aval Malchei Yisrael, the northern kingdom, what I refer to, as the northern kingdom, it's also known, can you see it's called Israel? There's Judah, Yehuda, or Judea, and there's Israel, or the northern kingdom, southern kingdom. So although in our modern day usage, we think of all of it as Israel, it was all the Jewish country, actually the northern kingdom was called Israel, because it was the 12 tribes, the 10 tribes, the majority of Israel. And the southern kingdom basically was Yehuda, and a small amount of Benjamin, and the Levium were there to serve in the Beit HaMikdash. Okay. So what made them different? Malchei Yisrael goes, Chachamim shelo yadun v'lo daninoto. When it came to the kings of the north, the kings of Israel, the rabbis handed down a ruling, we do not put them on trial, and we do not subpoena them to testify. Lo me'id v'lo me'id nolav. You don't ask a king of the north to testify, and you don't ask people to testify against the king. Very, very different from the world of Trump and Biden and all of that. Mipnei sheliban gas, because the hearts of the northern kings, they were profoundly arrogant. V'yavo min hadavar takala, v'hefsed al hadat. And if you would call them to court, the end result could be a disaster, both a disaster for the people, a tragedy, and an impact on religion. And it came to this event. In the Gemara Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Amud Aleph, page 19, folio 19a, where it talks about the Mishnah. This is a Gemara talking about the Mishnah. And again, remember, first you have the Mishnah and the Gemara, and then later comes Rambam, like almost 1,000 years later, 900 years later. Rambam's Mishneh Torah that we're learning gathers the laws of the Mishnah, Gemara, Chumash, and so much else into a code of law. But this is the source. Omar of Yosef, Lo shanu el Malchei Yisrael. They taught only in terms of kings of Israel, the north, that we don't put them on trial, and we don't testify, and we don't ask them to submit themselves to justice. Of Malchei Bet David, Dan v'Dani Notan. So you see, Rambam very often quotes the Gemara literally. Like what I'm reading you sounds to the ear. Isn't that what you just read, Rabbi, in the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam? Yeah, he just takes the text from the. It's not called plagiarism. Everybody knows they don't want him being creative. They want him giving us Torah law. We're not looking for a creative Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism. We want an Orthodox approach that you take Torah law and you're putting it in a code, but don't mess with the words. And he cites in Jeremiah 21. So in Jeremiah 21, Yirmiyahu was the prophet in the south, in Judea, in the time that Babylonia, King Nebuchadnezzar of Bavel, was planning to invade Israel, take down the Beit HaMikdash, exile the Jewish people from Israel into Babylonia. Jeremiah was the prophet in the most horrible of times. And he was an honest prophet. His job was to prophesy and convey the word of God. Interesting thing about Yirmiyahu. He prophesied to the people, this is what God says is going to happen. And you know how people reacted? They put him in prison. They didn't like what Jeremiah was telling them. So they threw him in prison, like that was going to solve it. History shows it didn't solve anything. Nebuchadnezzar came in, the prophecy happened, like with Yosef HaTzadik. When Joseph prophesied, you can throw him in prison, you could sell him into slavery. It's not going to change the truth. It's only going to make things harder when they do happen. So here also, Yirmiyahu said, Lebeit Melech Yehuda Shemu Devar Hashem. He was prophesying in the south to the kings of Judea the word of God. Beit David, Komar Hashem. O house of David. David HaMelech, King David, was long since passed away. By now, it's already hundreds of years later, and we're getting close to the end of the reign of that time of the Judeans. And he's talking to the house of David, their descendants. Dinu Aboker Mishpat. He says, God commands of you, O kings of Judea, in the morning, Boker, judge justice, hand down justice, hand down judgment. Bahatzilu Gazul, Gezel is robbery. Save and protect victims of robbery, Miyad Oshek, from persecutors who defraud them. Pentetzecha Esh Chamati, because if you, the kings of the south, do not enforce justice and protect those who are victims of treachery, a fire will break out, the fire of my anger. Chama, well, from the word cham, hot, my wrath, W-R-A-T-H, the fire of my wrath. You don't want that to burst forth in flames, uva'ara ve'ein machabeh, such that it will burst in flame, such that no one will be able to put out that fire. Mipnei ro'ah ma'al alechem, because of so much injustice, if you're evil. So the Gemara cites this pasuk and does an interesting logical inference. We see from Jeremiah 21 that the kings of Judah are commanded to sit in judgment. And the Gemara learns out, V'i lo daininan le inhu hechi daine. If we're not allowed to subject such kings to be put on trial, if we want to accuse them of a crime, if we're not allowed to a dayan is a judge, and dan is to judge. If we can't judge the king, then how could Jeremiah be telling them they have an obligation to judge, hand down justice? Because we have a concept in Judaism that kashat atzmicha v'achar kach kashat acherim. Sort of, if you have to be subject yourself to the same jeopardy before you can go around subjecting other people to jeopardy. you don't have that right to put other people on trial and be like such a macher and wield such power if you're not ready to subject yourself to the same justice system. And from this, we see that kings of the south could be judged. So what about the north? Ela malchei Yisrael, memtet maitama, lo. When it comes to the kings of Israel, namely the north, what's the reason that we don't judge them and we don't have them judge? Mishum ma'aseh shahaya, because of an incident that once happened. As you know, in those days, people had servants. The Hebrew word for servant is the same as the Hebrew word for slave, eved. When you use the English terminology, you know there's a difference between a servant and a slave, but it's the same word in Hebrew. Technically, you could say a servant is a masharet, but a person who's a servant in your household is typically referred to as an eved, the same word. Okay, so obviously a king, he's a king. He has a big palace, he has a lot of wealth, and he has a lot of stuff going on. Of course, he has a whole palace of servants. So there once was an incident, the Avdei de Yanai. Yanai is the name of a king of Israel. And again, when I say Israel, I'm referring to the northern kingdom. So Yanai HaMelech, King Yanai, had an Eved. He had a servant. The Yanai Malka. Kotel Nafsha. And what happened was that servant killed somebody. Ha. So, all right. Amar Lahu Shimon ben Shetach lechachamim. So the great Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach said to the other sages, we have to put this guy on trial. Tenu einechem bo unadoneno. We have to turn our eyes on him. It's uncomfortable. He is the servant of the king, but he killed somebody. He's got to be put on trial. So we have to put him on trial. Okay. So what are we going to do? Shochalei avdecha katal nafsha. So the rabbis, the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, sent a message to King Yanai. Your servant killed somebody or is accused of killing somebody. So Shadrei Lahu. So they said, he's got to go on trial. So the king sent the servant to court. Face justice. What can I do? Sholchulei ta antnami. The Sanhedrin then sent another message to King Yanai, a subpoena. You also have to come to testify. And they based it on Shmos Chaf Aleph. In the book of Shmos, we just read it the past week. Shmos Chaf Aleph, chapter 21, just read it last week, as it happens. When an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. You don't make a celebration and have a lot of beef and turn it into a bar mitzvah. That's loss. That's a loss. The ox killed somebody. I don't know if you can call it murder. It's not intended. Well, it is intended. The ox shall be stoned. Its flesh shall not be eaten. What about the owner of the ox? He is not to be punished. You don't punish a guy because his mindless ox just killed somebody. It's not his fault. Ve'im, if, however, shor nagachu mitmol shel shom, v'hu ad b'valav v'lo yishmerenu. But if that ox had a history in the past of having gored someone, and they use the word habit, I don't want to say habit, but the ox had, or habit, the ox went around goring people in the past, and there was maybe the ox didn't kill anybody, otherwise it wouldn't even be around anymore. course, it would have been executed, or whatever you want to call it, killed, per this verse. It'll be stoned and its flesh not eaten. But let's say it went around goring people. And even though it didn't kill anybody, it left people badly injured to the degree that the owner was put on trial for civil suit, a lawsuit like a tort. Your property, your animal, injured this person. And there's been testimony, and you're on notice, and this is not the first time your ox has done it. And let's say the owner already knows about it and never did anything about it. Then the Torah says, "V'hemit isha isha hashor yisakel." Well, if that ox later then went on to actually kill somebody, and there already was a record on trials of testimony, the owner was on notice, then the ox gets stoned to death, the gamba alav yumat, and the owner also gets executed. But then it goes on to say he doesn't literally get executed, but he has to pay a financial ransom for his life. We don't execute him if he can't afford a ransom. We're not going to kill him, but he deserves to be executed. You don't simply say, well, it was my animal and it's a brainless animal. No, you were on trial. You should have taken all kinds of precautions, maybe even gotten rid of that animal. So if ransom is imposed, and it is imposed, im kofer yushad alav natan pidyon nafsho, then the owner can stay alive by paying ransom on his life, whatever the court sets upon him as the price to stay alive. Okay. So what we see is that if an owner owns something that kills, there's a trial, and maybe the ox is executed, and the owner is expected to show up in court and be part of the trial, give testimony, and be in the courtroom and learn on the record you are the owner of an ox that killed, or that even just gored. Based on that pasuk in Mishpatim that we read this past Shabbos. So it says he should be testified against with his owner. The Torah states the owner of the ox should come and stand over his ox. Okay. V'huah b'valav. Just read that. Okay. Based on that, the Sanhedrin ruled, King Yanai, your servant apparently killed somebody. That's even worse than an ox, because a servant has a brain, and you're the owner of the servant, and so we're subpoenaing you to court, and you're going to have to testify. Asa, b'yasif. So he arrived in court, King Yanai, and he sat down. Now, you may remember, I believe I taught this on our Thursday night class, that in a halakhic court trial, the judges sit and the witnesses stand. And I mentioned to you, if you ever watch a movie of like European trials from the 1800s, 1700s, even earlier, even some, I think there was a witness for the prosecution. I think that was the one with Marlene Dietrich, and there are some others there, some of the Dreyfus trial ones, and they always have the witnesses stand and the judges sit. So in the same way, in halakha, if you've ever been to a beis din, the rabbis of the beis din sit, even a conversion beis din, the rabbis sit and the witnesses stand. And if they have attorneys representing them, the attorneys stand and the rabbis sit. Okay. So Rabbi Yanai, King Yanai was in court, and they said to him, he came in and he took a seat. And they said to him, you're here to testify, you'll have to stand. Asav Yosef. He came and he sat down. Amar le Aleph Lamed, Amar le Shimon ben Shetach. So Rabbi Shimon, the son of Shetach, said, Yanai HaMelech, Amod HaRaglecha. King Yanai, you'll have to stand on your feet. V'ya'idu b'cha. And there's going to be testimony against you, and witnesses are going to testify against you as soon as you stand up. And be aware, lo lefanenu atalmid. It's not that you're standing up because of our egos, that you're standing up for us, the judges. Ela lifnei misha amar v'hayaha olam atalmid. Rather, you're going to be standing in the presence of God Almighty. One of the expressions for God is Elokeinu, Elokim. There's Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One of the Shakai, there are many different terms for God. One is Misha Amar V'Hayaha Olam, like Baruch Sha'amar V'Hayaha Olam, the bracha, that psalm and bracha at the very beginning of Shacharit morning services that precedes Pesukei de Zimra, all the different psalms that are recited, and that ultimately conclude with Yishtabach. So Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Olam, blessed, we say, is he who spoke and the world came into being. That's a term for God. He spoke, right? Yehi or, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be this, and there was this. Let there be that, and there was that. So he's the one, Sha'amar V'Haya Olam. He's the one who spoke, and the world came into being. So the judge, Shimon ben Shetach, says, understand, you've got to stand up. People will testify against you, and it's not that you're standing up for us, you're standing up for God. Shneimar, as it says, V'amdu shnei ha'anashim asher lahem ariv, the Gomer, and they cite from Devarim, Deuteronomy 19, verse 17, if someone appears against another party to testify maliciously, otherwise, testifying in court, it happens to be in the context of false testimony. But what I'm about to read now also would be true of honest testimony. It says the two parties to the dispute shall appear before Hashem. The omdu, the word appear is a bad translation. I often point out how the Sepharia translation is bad. It doesn't say v'hofiu, it says v'omdu, and they shall stand. V'omdu shnei ha'anashim asher lahem ariv l'fnei Hashem. And the two people, litigants, who have their fight, shall stand amdu l'fnei Hashem. They'll stand in the presence of God. Okay. So, as it says, you have to stand. So, up. So, King Yanai responded, Amarlo, lo kisha shetomar ata, ela kama sheyomrucha v'recha. I am not going to stand. I am the king of Israel. I am not going to stand simply because you tell me to do it. If the whole court tells me to do it, then I'll stand. All right. Folio 19b. It continues. Nifnei liyamino. So Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach turned to his right, to the, 35 justices of the Capital Crimes Court. So he turned to the right. Well, are you guys going to join me and tell the king stand? Kovshu paneim bakarka. They all, panim is face. Karka is earth, land. They all buried their faces in the ground. Nobody wanted to look up. Nobody's looking up. Nifnel is smolo. All right, that's on his right. So much for those 35. Turns to the other side. What about you? Somebody want to join me and tell this king he's got to stand? Kovshu paneim bakarka. And they all buried their faces in the sand. Amar lahen Shimon ben Shetach. So Shimon ben Shetach, who had the courage to tell King Yanai to stand, but now finds he's there all alone with 70 judges around him refusing to say boo. He says, Ba'alei machshavot atem, you all are people of such great depth of thought. Choshev is to think, machshava is thought, a thought. Baal is a master. You're masters of such deep thoughts. And now take a look what we have here. Yavo Baal machshavot, v'yipara mikem. All I can say, he was very upset. Shimon ben Shetach, if you've ever been in a position where you took a courageous position and you thought other people were going to back you up, and then it turns out nobody's backing you up. Everybody's looking down at the table, and they're all by yourself. You know what that feels like. So he says to them, you, the people with great, great thoughts and great ideas, the master of thoughts, namely God Almighty, another name for God, Baal Machshavot, he's going to have to make you pay for this. Miyad Bo Gavriel, immediately the angel Gabriel from heaven came down to earth, V'chavatan bekarka v'metu, and at that very moment, he struck them to the ground, and all those judges died. Ba'ota sha'ah, at that moment, after that incident, Amru, Melech lo don v'lo doninoto, lo me'id v'lo me'idnoto, they said, when it comes to a king of the northern kingdom of Israel, given that they're like Yanai HaMelech, that on the one hand, when you tell them to stand, they won't stand, and on the other hand, because everybody knows what these guys are made of, no one wants to mess with them, and no judge has the courage to really just do the thing. So they made a rule. There's no point, we can't subpoena them to testify. And therefore, if they're not going to testify, they don't have the right to hand down judgment. They can't testify against, and people cannot testify about them. And so that's how it came to be in Mishneh Torah, Hilkhot Malachim, that when it came to the kings of Israel, everyone's terrified of them. And so, because we see why. Anyone who rebels against the king of Israel may be executed by the king. That's all. And we've covered that already, so we're not going to go through it again. And that's going to bring us now into the power of the king to have people killed. So how much more so does he have the power to take everybody into war? And here's why this is important again in the contemporary context as well. Biden announced, and Blinken, so they announced now they're going to do an investigation. First of all, has Israel used phosphorus bombs that the United States sold to Israel? So apparently there are certain terms for the use of phosphorus bombs, and the accusation is that Israel has dropped those bombs in southern Lebanon in violation of the terms of the agreement. What's going on is the focus of most people's attention is what's going on in Gaza with Hamas. But Israel has the exact same problem up north. There it's called Hezbollah, and that's also Iranian-backed Shiites, and they're terrorists by a different name. It's the same game. Shiite Muslims go out to destroy Jews and do not recognize a Jewish country anywhere, not even in Tel Aviv. So they're in southern Lebanon, and their leader is named Nasrallah. And Nasrallah has been threatening for like 20 years or 10 years, he's going to make war and wipe out Israel. But thank God he's mostly a blowhard. And everyone in Israel really was afraid when this one broke out this time in the south after October 7, Shabbat of Shmini Atzeret, when the 1,200 people were murdered. Everyone was afraid that when Israel goes in with all this time with everything, they really thought Nasrallah finally is gonna walk the walk, and he's gonna come with everything he's got in the north. And it's been one of the great miracles that God paralyzed him. Not literally, he's not physically paralyzed, but no one really fully understands what it's all about. But he's not coming at Israel with most of what he has. But what he's been doing instead is he's been shooting rockets, missiles, a few here, a few there, to show that he's participating in the fight. But he's going out of his way not to send all the stuff he's got, not to shoot everything he's got. And it seems the best guess everyone has, because everybody thought that he was going to have like a zillion times more stuff than Hamas. And people now are beginning to get the feeling that he's actually afraid for 10 years he could be a blowhard because no one ever tested him. And people are getting the feeling that he sees what Israel is doing to Gaza, and he's turning it into rubble. And he's afraid they'll turn Lebanon into rubble. And, if you turn Gaza into rubble, well, it's Gaza. But to start turning Beirut and all of Lebanon into rubble, Nasrallah eventually will be a dead man, because the Lebanese will kill him for doing that. Like in Gaza, they're all in it together. There's no innocent Gaza, maybe there's 10 innocent Gaza civilians out of a million. But most of them, they voted for Hamas, they cheer Hamas. Whenever Hamas has hurt anybody, they celebrate. But in Lebanon, it's not quite the same deal. So why am I saying this? So Nasrallah all of a sudden did a barrage of rockets and missiles about 2-3 days ago. He killed one person and they've injured 8 people, which compared to what goes on with Hamas seems like nothing, but every Jewish life is a world. So Israel really came at him with fire and brimstone. And the idea being, we haven't come at you this hard since ever. And we're coming at you this hard for one day only to let you know we're ready to come at you if we have to. So that stopped Nasrallah for now. All of a sudden, Biden and Blinken get involved, and they announce there's a report that part of what Israel may have just hit Nasrallah with, they may have shot some of the phosphorus bombs that we sold them, and it might be a violation of the terms of the agreement for them to use those bombs. So I don't understand. You're selling Israel bombs, and the terms of the agreement are you can't use them. So, I mean, it's not like they're dropping phosphorus bombs just on the head of some Arab. They just got attacked by a foreign invaded by terrorists. Anyway, so what you have happening is that kind of situation where now they're going to be checked out in that. And then Biden and Blinken announced while they're at it, Israel just freed up the 2 hostages. So on the night that they freed the 2 hostages in Rafah, they also dropped bombs in the area that killed 67 civilians, to the degree that you want to call anybody there a civilian and not a co-conspirator. So now they're going to investigate whether Israel wrongly bombed southern Lebanon while they were rescuing their hostages. Like, how many American citizens that were taken hostage by Hamas have Biden and Blinken rescued? So, right, what we do is we just give away our prime prisoners, like that woman basketball player, Brittany Griner or whatever. So Putin held her. So we gave away a major guy that we were holding, an international illegal arms seller. And we did that to get Brittany Griner back so she could play basketball. That's how Biden and Blinken do it. So Netanyahu did what he had to do. But the king of Israel did not sit and worry about whether he's allowed to use this weapon or that weapon. And he didn't worry about whether he has to justify it to any court. When it came to the king, yesh lemelech reshut lehorgo uletakena olam kefi ma shesha'at tzricha. Let's understand that. As a general rule in Judaism and the Torah, there's capital punishment in the Torah. But people think, oh, Torah has death sentence. Do it all the time. And as we have learned, if a Sanhedrin once in 7 years sentenced someone to death, they would consider it a murderous Sanhedrin. And then there's another opinion that says if they executed one guy in 70 years, they would consider it a murderous beis din. In other words, they had the authority to execute, but it was so hard to meet the requirements, the procedural requirements for a death penalty, that people did not get executed because you needed ra'aya barura. First of all, you needed testimony that it was absolutely seen, not simply circumstantial evidence, but you had to have conclusive evidence And you had to have hasra. You had to have a formal warning that the slayer had to be warned before he slew his victim. And you needed 2 witnesses. 1 witness is not enough. So if you can't execute someone, if there hasn't been eyewitness to the killing, murder, plus a warning, plus at least 2 witnesses, etc., etc., etc. So you couldn't execute people. But that wasn't true of the king. Yesh l'melech reshut l'hargo l'takin olam k'fi masha hashat tzricha. The king not only has authority without warning, without 2 witnesses, without clear testimony and evidence, the king not only has authority to have someone killed, he can do it simply on grounds that he thinks it will make society better. So how do they call it here? Let's see how they translate it. The king is granted license to execute them and to improve society according to the needs of the time. Wow. And you see the term? If only the ignorant people who talk about tikkun olam had an idea of what tikkun olam actually is. You have all these Jewish social justice warriors talking about how, well, there shouldn't be any bail because of tikkun olam, and there shouldn't be any prison sentences because of tikkun olam, and there should be this for tikkun olam, and there should be this for tikkun olam. So it turns out they have no idea what tikkun olam is. Tikkun olam means if a king decides there's been too much crime lately, it's turning into parts of Oakland, St. Louis, Chicago, Saturday night in Chicago. And the king of Chicago decides, for tikkun olam, we're just going to send the cops into Chicago with instructions to kill the first 20 people they catch on the street. According to the Rambam, king can do it. Maybe they didn't do anything wrong. It's tikkun olam. That's the kind of social justice warrior that king is. That's social justice. We're going to put an end to killings Saturday night in Chicago because there's a new king in town. And anybody found on the streets is getting killed, getting shot. That's all. And there's no lawsuits. You can't bring it. Why? There's no chance you cannot sue the police in court. Tikkun olam, because I'm the king. So that's tikkun olam. A whole new world of tikkun olam. So that's literally what it says. I'm not just going on a rant. I'm going on a rant also. But it's tikkun olam. Tikkun means to repair. Olam is the world. If the world has become impossible for people, if it becomes Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Amorah, where law-abiding people cannot survive, then a king has an enormous amount of right to do it. I mean, look at it. I'm not exaggerating. Yesh lamelech reshut l'hargo. He has the right for tikkun olam. In other words, to make one person an example? No. B'horeg rabim b'yom echad. He can kill as many as he wants. He may execute many on one day. Tikkun olam. And then he hangs them. You don't just kill them. You take them and you line a street of whatever neighborhood in Chicago that's going on Saturday nights. And you hang them up and down the street from the lampposts, from the king. I'm not saying we should do that in America. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is the extent of the king having that kind of power and tikkun olam. Lahatil ema u'leshaber yad rishei ha'olam. And in case you think I'm making up the reason, there must be more background. No. In order to cast fear into the hearts and destroy the power of the wicked of the earth. You know, it's so heartbreaking when you meet someone, and I have met people, typically they're not Jewish, but I'll give you an example. The guy who's my trainer ever since the lung transplant. I have a guy who helped me at Cedars-Sinai Hospital build myself up to be qualified and eligible to get the lung transplant. It's an insane thing. You have to show them you're like within a day of dying so that you're eligible to get a lung. But then you have to show you're healthy enough that if they give you the lung, you'll come out of the operation okay. So you have to find this fine moment where you're just sick enough that you won't make it without the lung, but you're so strong that you totally are ready for the surgery. So I wasn't strong enough, and I needed a guy to build me up. And Denise knew a guy, and he's been coming ever since. He's been working out with me. So he was just telling us the story. First time he ever told us the story. His brother was shot to death or stabbed to death one night in St. Louis. Didn't do anything wrong. His brother was a darling guy and used to do favors for people. So his brother had some people that were homeless, and he let one or two homeless people live with him. And he got stabbed to death. It turned out it was like a mother and the son stabbed him to death, and the mother and the son took whatever cash or whatever he had. And this guy's brother is dead for, I don't remember, 10 years, 20 years. I mean, where's the justice in that? And do you know, that's just a guy I know. Do you know how many people, do you ever see the news when the mothers are on TV on Sunday morning about their little boys and girls being shot to death by drive-bys in Chicago and other cities? And they kind of really are you want to talk about innocent civilians. Like, the only thing is they keep electing the same people to run their city. But and the same district attorneys. But what's true is that those are innocent people, and your heart breaks. So Rambam says, brings the Gemara, the king of Israel, simply for tikkun olam, to repair the world and to cast fear into the hearts of evil criminals and killers, may go ahead and just have people killed at random, large numbers, and hang them. Okay. So as we wrap it up for today, the king, this is finally, he's going to war. The king may levy taxes on the nation for his needs for the purposes of war. And he doesn't go through Congress. Again, I began at the beginning of class. I'm not making the argument that monarchy is better than democracy. I'm just pointing out the difference. If the president of the United States wants to go to war, he's got to get, or at least he's supposed to get, a declaration of war by Congress and under the War Powers Act. And if he wants more money in taxation, it's got to go through the House. The House has to approve the budget. And king can't just, or the president can't just reallocate. And of course, things go on in this country that technically aren't the way they're supposed to go. And I don't want to get into that now. He may fix a duty on merchandise. He can set like a sales tax. And anybody who fails to pay the tax that the king sets gets executed. That's all. King has the right to decree if someone does not pay these duties or taxes, property will be seized to pay that tax, or that the non-payer will be killed. And it follows from what we read last week from chapter 8 of Sefer Shmuel Aleph, where Samuel warned them this is what's going to happen. And then the king can go and can conscript people, valiant men, men of war, and employ them as his soldiers for his chariot and cavalry. And so it goes. He can amass his army and they're ready to go to war. And when they're ready to go to war, and that brings us into chapter 5, which is where we'll start next week, God willing. We'll get to it, chapter 5 next week. We started it. We jumped backwards in order to give a much deeper, richer understanding of the unbridled, unrestricted power of the king. And we will continue with it, God willing, next Thursday. The king goes to war, the idea of the Melchemet Mitzvah, the Melchemet Reshut, and how far he can go with it. And the reason I've been doing this is you've probably come to realize by now, is that you see the extraordinary breadth and width of how much power the king has when we go to war. He doesn't have to go back to the Knesset. He doesn't have to ask Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, are you okay if we go into Khan Yunis? He doesn't have to ask, does anybody here have a trouble if we call up more people or we expand, we extend the reserve, we did a reserve call up and we're going to extend the amount of time they're being called up. The king did not ask anyone's permission. He had complete authority by virtue of the Torah, chapter 20 of Devarim, by virtue of what Shmuel, chapter 8 of 1 Samuel said. And Rambam brings it all together with these Gemaras from Sanhedrin, folios 19 to 21. Okay, and that brings it to for tonight. Thank you so much for being here.